This is Earl White, real estate attorney. This video is about purchase price contract provisions in real estate purchase and sale contracts. So we're going to cover what is the purchase price contract provision and what are the key elements in this contract provision. So first, the purchase price provision is a provision that defines the total sum of money that the buyer must bring to the closing to pay the seller, the timing and sequence that the buyer is going to make those payments, and also providing clarity on the source of funds that the buyer is going to utilize for making this payment. So first part of it is obviously the purchase price that the buyer is going to pay. Now, purchase price is the total sum that the buyer has to pay to the seller at the closing. This is to be distinguished from net sale proceeds for the seller, and the net sale proceeds to the seller are the purchase price minus closing costs, minus lien payoffs, and minus any transfer fees that may be charged by the state or any other entity for purposes of the closing. The second part of the purchase price provision is the deposit. So the deposit is money that the buyer puts down in the beginning of the contract, perhaps upon contract signing or perhaps upon 10 days or some defined period of time. And then that's contributed at closing towards the buyer's down payment and the buyer's closing costs. And also at closing, the deposit from whatever escrow holder that the buyer has paid this deposit to, so an attorney, title company, escrow company, the buyer will pay that, then that money will be transferred to the seller at the closing. The deposit is sometimes broken down into two deposits. In that case, it might be referred to as an initial deposit and an additional deposit. The initial deposit you may see often in new construction where the property is essentially reserved with the initial deposit. And then you make an additional deposit once you're officially going under contract. You may also see an initial deposit and an additional deposit. The buyer wants to put something initially upon going under contract, but is not comfortable to put the whole sum until he finishes due diligence or seller completes something on their end. So in that case, you may have a two deposit structure. Another portion of this purchase price provision is the mortgage amount. That is the amount of money that the buyer is borrowing in order to complete the sale. And the last item is the balance of the purchase price that the buyer must bring to closing to pay the seller. So basically at a high level, we have the purchase price. Then we have any deposits that the buyer has contributed towards this purchase price already. So minus that from the price, then we have the mortgage amount that the buyer is borrowing and giving to the seller at the closing. So minus that from the amount due from the buyer to the seller. And then finally, once you minus the deposits and the mortgage amount, you have the cash for the down payment that the buyer is going to bring to the closing in order to meet the sum that is paid to the seller.